I wanted to start with how the iwCLL was founded, and I remember that when I met with Dr. Binet, I stood in front of his apartment house on the river, and,
Sure.
and he took me up to his apartment and showed me the room where the meeting was held and where the first dinner was, and then he started telling me about how he started coming to the U.S. I want to say Cornell, or maybe it was Rockefeller University where he went, and I think he met Eugene Cronkite, and through Eugene Cronkite he met you. Maybe you remember differently.
No, that's
anyway. You go ahead.
Okay. The origin of International Workshop on CLL, or iwCLL as we call it now, was very small, and nobody knew that it would become a formal organization. And as I recall, after Dr. Jacques-Louis Binet had devised his staging system, which was immediately accepted, it came a couple of years after our staging system had come out, and Binet invited a group of CLL interested colleagues from around the world to Pitié Salpêtrière, the hospital where he was himself located. And what was the basis whom he sent invitation, I do not know. But I do know that because I attended it with my own mentors, both Cronkite and Savitsky. I think Arthur Savitsky also. Do you have the list?
I don't, or
Yeah,
I don't recall having it, but that's going to be worth tracking down.
Yeah, I think Arthur Savitsky was there, and Gene Cronkite, and Gene had, actually, Binet had already known me or known of me through the staging paper that had come out in 1975, Blood. And when Jacques-Louis knew, as you pointed out, Gene Cronkite, and he knew that I was in Gene Cronkite's group. So he felt that it was only natural that in his list of invitees, he included me and Arthur, who was one of the co-authors of the staging paper. And at that time, he also had from the US, I think Pradeep Chandra. Chandra was at that time doing the potassium 40 body burden of cell mass study at Brookhaven. And that, I think those were the 4 from America, Cronkite, Rai, Savitsky, and Chandra. I do not think that Michael Keating or anybody else had become known in CLL field at that time. In any case, so we were a group of people meeting for the first time in a very nice, largish room, very collegially seated, so that it was not a conference setting, it was a meeting or workshop setting. And everybody got to know each other. It was a 2-day gathering, and I know that Emily Montserrat was there, people from Sweden and other Nordic countries. I know that Guillaume Diguero, who was Binet's protege, as I was a protege of Cronkite and Savitsky, and from Britain, Danny Katowski was there, and I do not recall whether David Galton was there. He was there?
I can't recall.
Yeah.
I think Dr.
Yeah.
Binet told me, but I don't recall.
Well, we have a record
Yeah.
of somewhere of who. Any case, we were about 14, 15 people, and we had a great exchange of idea, a great level of camaraderie, and a wonderful experience, social and intellectual experience of in discussing CLL. But no plans were made as to any future meetings. I think Dr. Binet had obtained some funds which supported our travel and our stay in Paris, and we all went away extremely happy. Then, now none of this thing that I am mentioning now has ever been formally recorded or even scrutinized, challenged for their validity. But my sense is that then a year or less than 2 years later, we had some international meeting, either it was ASH or whatever, and most of the people who were at the Paris meeting happened to be there. This was probably in Toronto, Montreal or Toronto, in Canada, and it was, I think, I who contacted all the participants of Paris meeting who were also present in this meeting in Canada, and invited them, I think by phone, because there was no email and no regular mail because it took a long time. I think by phone, while we were all there, to get together, and we had a second meeting essentially consisting of all the Paris attendees and a few more. I am sure that there is some record somewhere. And then, and everybody was happy to be there, and we just followed up on what had transpired in Paris, and then the third time, it was again some occasion, probably again an ASH meeting. And by this third meeting, we started to call it an international workshop on CLL, and Emily Montserrat, Dan Katowski, and who else? Guillaume and Binet. And by this time, Binet and I had, by no acclamation, but by sheer acceptance, became the initiators or leaders or what, and by self-appointment, if you want to call it. But we were considered to be the people, largely because our mutual friendship, trust, and warmth between us, and because Binet staging and Rai staging were the prevalent, well accepted staging systems, and therefore it became natural that if the two of us were in the leadership, then it became like that. Although at this time we also invited Jacques, who had developed the TTM system, which was very cumbersome but made some sense, but it was impossible to put into clinical practice. At the first meeting we also had in Paris Morgan Hansen. I think he was there.
Oh, that
Yeah,
for sure I didn't
yeah,
know.
I think so. And then it became a formalized thing, and we were meeting every 2 years. And I remember somewhere along the line in Barcelona we had a formal meeting to put together the guidelines for diagnosis of CLL, of response definition to treatment, and all the other things that go with that.
Would the Barcelona meeting be the fourth meeting, or was that an ancillary meeting?
It was an ancillary
Very
meeting.
meeting.
It was a meeting called just for writing up. And at this time, I think Robert Peter Gale, Bob Gale, had become one of the principals of CLGB, of iwCLL. And then with Gale, we organized couple of 2 or 3 meetings of iwCLL. One was held in Napa Valley, and Bob was very resourceful in getting industry support and funding for travel support for colleagues coming from abroad.
The Napa Valley meeting is where fludarabine got its wings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. And then we had another meeting in the US, was in St. Louis at the time of ASH meeting in St. Louis. And at that moment, I believe Carlo Croce was introduced to iwCLL. And at this meeting, Michael Keating and Tom Kipps became actively involved in CLL. And then there was a very important meeting in Paris at which Lee Nadler, Kipps, Graver, Michael Graver, and Keating. So the US presence became much more impressive and formidable in Paris.
After the Napa Valley
Yes.
meeting. Because I remember, I think that both Nadler and Kipps were present at the Napa Valley meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And Keating too, I just maybe don't remember.
Yes.
But it sounds like the Paris meeting after the St. Louis meeting made the American presence well known.
Yes. So I think somewhere along the line we recognized that Germany was not represented, and we proposed that Hartmut Donor, who had just published in 2000 December the New England Journal of Medicine paper on fish cytogenetics in CLL, and Michael Halleck, who had become the chairman of the German CLL group and had organized extremely successful and impressive German CLL study group meetings with the international advisors' presence. So we incorporated those two persons in this iwCLL leadership, or we call committee membership, and soon after that invited Peter Hillman to become a member of iwCLL committee. And I must say that an important contribution was made by Stuart Smith, Dr. Smith, who had done his PhD thesis on CLL related topic, and he had become a principal of Darwin company, and not only for assisting us in holding these conferences, workshops every 2 years, but Stuart Smith, by virtue of his own interest in CLL, became a good friend and advisor until he left Darwin Gray. So we progressively enlarged with Dr. Binet sort of retiring, and we needed to include other people, and these were the people who were added. So that Kipps and Keating were added from the United States when Savitsky and Cronkite sort of retired to replace those two, and Galton was there to advise, but he was never formally, he liked to travel, and so Hillman came when Danny Katowski reached the retirement age, but Danny did not retire from iwCLL. It's a very good organization, very collegial, very friendly, and we do not have any rules and regulations or bylaws or anything. All we do is every 2 years hold this Congress. It has become very large, from 15 to 17 people in the first Paris meeting to, I was told at the recent meeting in September, October in Barcelona in 2009, there were more than 1,000 people, all studying CLL.
More than 2,000?
Yeah, about that number.
And do you recall what it was in London?
Just a few less. London was
pretty big also.
Yes.
And that was 2007 probably.
Right.